Well, welcome back, Speech Guy listener. We have a bonus episode here. We've done one other bonus episode. That was with my Grandma Tanoka, who has since passed away. So, yeah, this episode is attached to the He Got Game podcast episode, the kind of full episode. So, Chris did guest host that. Both he and I felt like there were some topics attached to that we didn't have the opportunity to get to. So we wanted to do a little bonus episode to sort of touch more specifically on those topics as they relate to the two speeches in He Got Game. But just to briefly reference them, that first father-son speech is between Denzel Washington's character Jake, when he basically has the first meaningful interaction with his son after getting out of prison for a week. Jesus Shuttlesworth. Kind of introducing on how he sees his son, whom he gets his name from. And then the second speech we looked at was the speech that he gave during the one-on-one game, sort of the final speech where he sort of gives his son the freedom, the opportunity to decide whether to send his dad back to prison. We'll go from there. So we got Chris back in the podcast studio. How we doing tonight, Chris?
Doing all right. Can't complain. Thank you. How about yourself?
I'm doing good. Doing all right. It's almost Friday. Chris, I don't know if you remember one of the first times that we met. I don't know if this wasn't the first time, but it was definitely one of the first times where I asked if you wanted to climb downstairs, a little top rope. Do you remember like one of the first things I asked you? Maybe it was a little audacious for a relatively first encounter.
Yeah, I think I did. I think you asked a very general question. What are your thoughts on the whole Black Lives Matter movement?
Yeah. So we got into the heat of it fairly quickly. And we've touched on a little bit of race type issues here and there, but tonight we're going a little bit deeper into it, but specifically in context of father-son type stuff. Here's the first question. We're going to open up things pretty much straightforward to the point. Your particular experience. There's certain ways I can identify with the two speeches. The identity that the father wants to imbue his son with, and then also granting him a certain freedom. But specific to you, Chris, as a Black man who obviously has a father, who also has his own son, like, is there anything watching either of those two speeches that sort of resonates most as a Black man that just stick out to you in that aspect of your identity?
Oh man, deep question. Yeah, absolutely. I think the overall theme of the movie was Jake wanted his son he wanted him to meet his potential, and if he could exceed his potential, so he pushed him for years to do just that, and he may have pushed him a little too hard. He risked alienating his son, and obviously he ended up in prison because there was an altercation, a domestic situation where he accidentally killed his wife. That wasn't what he intended, but I can absolutely identify with my father's relationship and I. He always pushed us to meet our potential and exceed it. Always. And once you meet the mark, then keep going. Keep going. Keep going.
So one thing that my grandpa didn't actually say this to me, but my mom did sort of pass it on through him. I can certainly imagine him saying it, but one thing that my grandpa always said was do everything to the best of your abilities and you'll owe apologies to no one. Was there any like quote snippet like that your dad used to drop on you regularly?
I mean, not just my dad, both my parents, but specifically my dad. Yeah, he wouldn't say anything quite as buttoned up as that, but do the best that you can because you have to was the overriding thing. You absolutely have to. You have to be better than you are. You have to be better than your peers to be seen as adequate in American society.
Do you know anything about your grandpa and dad's relationship growing up? Good, bad, average as far as you can tell?
It was good as far as I could tell. My grandfather was he was older. I don't know what the average age a person becomes a dad, but he was older. There's some complexity there, and that expectation was there.
So I want to tether kind of what you just shared with the interview that we've mentioned with the the Denzel Washington interview. So briefly to synthesize this interview that I'm referencing, this was done, looked like 6 years ago or so. And Denzel Washington was asked, um, basically his comments, his opinions on what what the United States needs to do about the fairness and effectiveness of the legal system, based upon the disparity in outcomes in who's in jail, based upon your socioeconomic status. And Denzel Washington's response was something to the effect of, the system's broke, but we can't really do anything about it. He was very brief on that. The problem is in the home. And then he went on to share how, I had two friends. Those two friends' fathers weren't around and they ended up in jail. And, I ended up Denzel Washington. And so how I sort of shared in the notes with you, Chris, there's a lot of people, just calling it like it is, white conservative Christians who say like, look, there it is. Like, end of conversation. Denzel Washington said it right there. I mean, what then does need to be done with system, right? Because that's obviously like a lot of the, and correct me if I'm wrong, because maybe Black Lives Matter does emphasize both the system and building better Black homes. Yeah, the white conservative Christian would say, yep, that's it. End of conversation. No need to upend the system and whatever sort of we were looking at. So how do you approach that particular question?
Denzel and basically every other adult Black person in America knows that that's a very complex question. There isn't enough time to really talk about all of it. So he chose one thing, and I think, and just from watching the interview, he chose that one thing is because it is something that Black people can improve. We're not dependent on anybody else to do that for us, or partner with us to do that. Talking about the system, yes, the system can be improved, but we can't do it by ourselves. We just can't. We're 13% of the population. We don't have the political power to move that rock yet.
Is it frustrating? Because I would presume that you do not identify with the beliefs of every single Black person in the Black Lives Matter. Right. All right. It's not like everyone believes the exact same thing. Right.
Right.
Some people a little more this way, a little more that way. And so, in fairness to that thought, because I'm trying to think like from the other end of it, like, because, as you're well aware, we've talked again a little bit about this, but as a practicing Catholic, someone who takes it really seriously, there's certainly a lot of people who would see like only the extremist Catholic who thinks that the election was stolen, and you can fill in all the other blanks.
Yep.
And it'd be something like, well, look, this is clearly the problem with America, is like people like that. But the thing that's being missed there, of course, is that I would not want someone to, out of hand, like reject the body of faith I call like the Catholic Church, because like all they can see is January. People like that, oh, you're January 6th, all that stuff.
Yeah.
And I think in fairness, that's, I think, a very reasonable sort of like metaphor lens, because, yeah, speaking like honestly, there's certainly a lot of people, fairly like reasonable people, who like will not consider anything of the sentiment of Black Lives Matter because all you see is like the extremist type view. or the type beliefs. But it's like, yeah, talking to you, like, I know that you wouldn't, do, whatever extremist things that Black Lives Matter, violence, whatever. The point, like, I'm trying to make here is like, there's a lack of conversation because maybe you can sort of help me out here and sort of see where I'm getting at. Um, I'm trying to use a metaphor to like lend legitimacy to like the conversation of anti-racism as in like the more academic sense of the term, and like quote unquote normal people,
Yeah.
moderate thinking people. And yeah, trying to use that extremist conservative as sort of like a metaphor type thing. Um
Yeah, I, I
okay.
I get where you're going, and yes, Denzel did say that, but you'll see a lot of that in the white conservative Christian, uh, and not obviously not all of them. This, the stereotype, the
Yeah.
people in the halls of power, or that are pandering to the people that will vote for them because of X, Y, and Z, whatever. They will take somebody like Denzel, who is a prominent, successful black
Mm,
person, and
yeah.
say, "Yeah, look, he said it." Or they'll take
Right.
Malcolm X, "Look, he said it." Or MLK, and they love to quote these people and say,
Yeah.
"Look, they said this," but it's out of context, or they twist the meaning of what was actually being said. And really, it's a lazy argument. He said it, and the system is absolved, and they are the system,
Yeah. Yeah.
and
Yeah.
that's not realistic. And like you mentioned, any extremist is gonna that do something similar.
Would do some What do you mean do something
I
similar?
mean, if you talk about Black Lives Matter, look how it's painted in the media. Really, if you boil it down, what is Black Lives Matter? It is civil rights.
That's certainly the vision. I'll certainly grant you that. Certainly
Yeah,
the vision. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. It's civil rights. I mean, is it executed that way? Is it perfect? No, certainly not. Is anything perfect? Certainly not. But the meaning is civil rights. That's what we're asking for. We want,
Yeah.
you look at America, you take it off the shelf, you get the box in front of you, and you look at the back, and I want America to be what it says on the tin. That's
Yeah.
that's what Lives Matter is supposed to mean. That's the ideal.
Yeah. There's do you listen to the 1619 podcast at all, or?
I do not, but I'm familiar with the project.
Yeah, yeah. I have listened to a few episodes, and in fairness myself, like some stuff I'm like, no, absolutely not. But some stuff is like, yeah, that makes perfect sense, completely interesting. One particular thing, even I know we're sort of digressing, but we're sort of on the same topic too.
Hmm.
But even the idea they're getting as, of course, is that America actually began in like 1619 with
Yeah.
the first slave ship. It's like even that, like the way that it's being communicated is like, yeah, of
Yep.
course, African Americans were a huge part in building up our country. Sure.
Yeah. Yeah.
So-
It's
but
undeniable.
there's doing your best to meet in the middle, like say, yeah, I'll definitely grant you this. Not sure about this, but yeah,
Mm.
anyway.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. I did comment in the notes that okay, so here's the example that I was sort of referencing in the notes specifically. There was a time where I was just making small talk with your son while you were on the audible or something, and then you came up, and like a lot of, how was he, 12? He was sort of mumbling, which I do when I did when I was 12,
Mm.
normal thing. And you said to him, like, speak up, just very firmly and clearly. And not a lot, I would definitely say the minority of fathers would say that. But I was just really impressed by that. And so what I'm getting at here is that, obviously you're sort of this, not just among African Americans, but just any dad, just an example of just an exemplar dad. And so is it frustrating though, going back to the Black identity, is it frustrating though when you see challenging, broken Black households, Black families who blame the system, quote unquote, but they're not exactly batting 1,000 in these other ways. That obviously it's not all just father son, but other family dynamics as well.
Yeah, I get what you're saying, but first of all, yes, thank you for the compliment. I'm just trying to model myself after my parents.
Yeah.
But does it frustrate me? Yes, but I don't think that is what we're seeing. I don't think that is the norm in the community. People blaming the systems overall. I mean, I grew up in a black neighborhood and
Mm-hmm.
all my life, and my experience is anecdotal, of course, but most people want to do good. Most people want to make their way. Most people want to do X, Y, and Z. They have aspirations, right? But surely, yes, there are people that do blame the system. We've been this way. It is this way. The system is this way. I get what you're saying. That is frustrating, but I don't. That again, I'm not an expert. I'm not aware of a study or anything like that. I'm sure there are studies out there, but I feel like that is a small vocal minority. That is, or not even vocal, but there's a lens on that minority of people.
Yeah,
Ronald Reagan
sure.
started kind of started with him. The whole welfare queen type thing. Seeing that being portrayed and parroted by politicians, and still today.
Yeah.
But to respond to why I did that with my son, that's something that my parents did, specifically my dad, because you have to use your voice. You have
Mm,
to stick up for yourself. You have to project. Otherwise, you will be ignored, actively ignored.
yeah.
You have to make them deal with you, and you have to be excellent.
There. I'm not sure how antsy you're getting over the debt ceiling here. Yeah, I'm just sort of like playing in my head with the idea of like the system type thing.
Hmm.
Um, and I'm trying to think. It's like what? Because the thing is, like everyone has a quote unquote like the system, like victimizing themselves because of one thing or another. And I'll admittedly, not podcasting scared here. Like my I have many systems. One of my systems is like being the youngest, right? In a sense, that's like a system where society and different individuals interact with you in a certain way because you're the youngest. And it's something like the point that I'm trying to make is like the kind of like language in terms of you're very big on like empathy, right? Which is good.
I am.
My only critique of that is that you need that, but also more complex language at times of different moral moments. But the idea is being that you can. I'm trying to think of like an exercise that one could do again, not to simply say like trying to meet people where they're at. I don't necessarily identify with or don't necessarily agree with your complaints about this particular system, but I'm going to try to think about what systems I might have issue with in my life. And even just like that kind of language, like going through that mental exercise, I think can at least go part of the way. And people just want to be seen. I reference, here we go. Here's the Kim Gardner interview or press conference I was referencing. The press conference that I'm referencing here is St. Louis's circuit attorney who, by almost all accounts, has done a very poor job and recently resigned. But there's this press conference shortly after a young woman from Tennessee lost her legs to a guy running into her on the sidewalk who was out on I forget the exact language, maybe you know it better, but was out on bond and had somehow broken his bond like 50 times, literally 50 times, dozens of times. But anyway, at this press conference, Kim Gardner is being questioned by the media, understandably, rightly so. But there was a group of African Americans, dozen maybe or so, who were very vocally supporting her against all like belief, despite everything that had happened. And one of the journalists from KMOX that I was listening to this on said something very profound and I strongly identify with, and I shared with you. It's these individuals there who are supporting her. They weren't supporting her whether or not they would have said this or not. I'll leave it to them to say. They weren't supporting her because they like seeing volleyball players lose their legs in accidents. It's like that's not, it's because it's this like metaphor or something. It's like if quote unquote we lose Kim Gardner in this position of leadership, then we're losing ground. It's in a sense. Yeah, I don't know. It's just a good example of that nuance, a sort of meeting in the middle that I think is lost sometimes.
Yeah, that's a fairly complex situation. Kim actually said several times that there are forces at play that, the public are generally unaware of. There are political forces that are at play. You know how in St. Louis and Kansas City we have our own local political situation, and then at the state level there's a different political situation.
Right.
And the people in the state, they say local control is good, blah 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 blah. But the reality is they are working to subvert that. I would imagine some of that is coming into play. Having Jefferson City saying or dictating, St. Louis, Kansas City don't even have control of their police departments. And for what reason? I just don't know. I mean,
I sort of lost you a little bit there, but
it's just
try again if you want.
Yeah, it's an analogy about. I'm trying to say that the politicians that are in Jefferson City, overwhelmingly, they say local control is good. People should be able to
Right.
determine what
Sure.
they want.
Yeah.
However, the things that they do are a direct contradiction of what they're saying, meaning taking local control away from the quote bad places end quote like Kansas City or St. Louis.
Right. Well, we'd be starting to digress if we kept going into
Right.
this, but well, yeah.
We don't have to. We don't have to. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's
We'll set that there. Okay. Sort of third point that I want to go off with the heading for this section of conversation. I put fathering outside an explicitly Christian framework. So one of the books that me and the guys were referencing in our last podcast was a book called Wild at Heart by John Eldridge. We referenced a book and a podcast interview from a gentleman called John Tyson. He was a Christian and acknowledged or observed or sensed that modern Western culture is lacking in rituals, specifically masculine rituals for initiating men or boys into men. And so the point is that, as one could tell from listening to that conversation, like how one goes about being a great dad, at least in my life, is shaped around this Christian language, right? That's just how I understand it. And if it's not explicitly Christian language, it's like it's influenced by it, or at least it feels that way. And there's a certain, well, you can break it apart in different ways. I think the most like benign and easy to access in conversation would be like a sort of innocent curiosity. Is like how I don't want to sound like goofy. Like how I'll put it really goofy and simply first. How non-Christians be good dads. But again, it's like I wanna like couch it not in like some sort of, oh, you don't have Jesus in your life, you can't be a good dad. No, it's not exactly like that. And you could maybe say like some segment is like that, but more so just like from a purely psychological standing. If you're not immersed in an environment that's constantly emphasizing this tension between mercy, judgment, discipline, freedom, like how do you build that worldview in your child, in your son. So, Chris, we have discussed religion a little bit before. You're lapsed Catholic, if I may use those words. So how do you go about that? In the circles that you hang around, how is it talked about? You got the floor.
Well, thank you. Well,
And you have to use gatekeeping in your response because that was one of your notes.
I'll get to that, but I guess I'm unaffiliated. That's what I would call myself. I don't know. But how do we talk about? It's kind of like you're right-handed, right? You've been right-handed all your life, yet there are left-handed people out there, and they get the job done. And it's hard to understand. I mean, I thought about this, and it's kind of hard to wrap your head around that. You're using wrong hand, but it still works. It's still so. I use that analogy because it's kind of the same way. Even though it's not faith based for me, in particular, I like to fall back to the whole empathy thing, and also a good example from my parents or my friends, and that's how I've done it.
So let's play a little bit with those very things that I just brought up there, that ritual thing.
Hmm.
Right. So one place that obviously you get rituals from just by default, as a Catholic, obviously we have baptism, first communion, and confirmation. Is that something that, like, sticks out to you? Like, I should maybe have some rituals for my son, or
No, because when I think about my experiences with those rituals, and I view them as something that I had to do because, that's just what we did. And I'm not saying it's a bad thing or a good thing. It's just what we had to do. It's kind of like punctuation. End of one thing, start of another thing type thing. But really, the ritual or, the example that I got from my father was this is how you be a good man. This is how you are a good man by doing this, that, and the other thing. And I mean, that's an entirely whole different conversation, I think, but it wasn't just one thing. That's my experience.
my dad did a lot of things with us growing up. I'd say there's initiation like things, initiation dash like, but for whatever reason, maybe it's because I am actively in a Christian culture, so
Hmm.
it's like the idea of ritual is just around more. But there's definitely a desire on my part to have had more rituals like that
Hmm.
in my life growing up.
So when you say a coming of age ritual, is there something specific that you wish?
Yeah, so we have, yeah, me and my friends have discussed this, and sort of made like little spreadsheets for us to look at. So here would be one of mine. And this can go for guy and girl, but and just purely honestly, like, if my daughter did not want to do something like this, like, I'd have no issue. But with my son, I wouldn't completely force him, but it would be pushed a lot harder. So here's one, maybe when they're, I don't know, 12. Well, you could do it in different ways at different ages, but let's say somewhere in the 10 to 12 is my knee-jerk reaction. He needs to plan a camping trip for the whole family, one night, whatever, car camping trip. It's completely on him. Now, he can delegate, of course. He can delegate, ask for help. He picks the place, picks out directions. No one's using their phone. He's going to find mapquest.com if that still exists. Gets the menu, blah, blah, blah. And it is completely on him. If we get lost, he has to bring us back. If he forgets a meal, we're going to be hungry that night. Right? And, but here's the thing is that it's like, if it happens, like, it's not like I would yell at him.
No,
Like,
no,
it's
no,
like,
no.
well, like, that sucks.
Yeah,
I guess we're gonna be hungry tonight, right? But yeah, that sense of responsibility being complete, that I feel like that'd be really powerful experience.
yeah.
The
Well, when you put it that way, there are certain points in my life with my dad that we did kind of do stuff like that where, learning to cook, absolutely. You are cooking the meal for the family. You have to. There's no You have to learn how to do this because if you can't cook, you can't live. So stuff like that. Learning to drive, I think that kind of qualifies, I think maybe. But there's one time I was learning to drive and 15-year-old me, we're going around this curve and there's a little bit of a runoff and I go out into the runoff because I was a little nervous and I look over at my dad and he's calm, cool as a cucumber. All right, and he just kind of looked at me and said, "All right, fix it." And that stuff like that where you have to you it's on you. There's no
Yeah.
one's going to save you. It's on you.
Yeah, your dad definitely had it spot on, with the sort of demeanor that he was presenting in the moment you were driving off the cliff. Um, yeah, because I mean, obviously, the father needs to clearly communicate if you're oblivious that something bad is going to happen if you don't
Yep.
change what you're doing. But you don't want that child to be more afraid of the dad than the consequences of that mistake,
Right.
you know?
Right. I think that's one
Um,
thing that my dad is really good at. How politicians say, or good politicians say, never legislate in an emergency because you're not
I
going to
never
get it
heard that
right. You're
actually.
not going to get it right. You're going to make more problems than you solve. And it's the same in my experience as a dad. It's the same thing. Um, don't do anything when your emotions are running high. If something happens, it happened. You can't change that, and how you react to that is going to be formative for your child. And you don't want to scar your child, like you said.
Yeah. So you have Kim Stanley Robinson. I don't know what quote you're referencing, so I'm intrigued what that's going to be in gatekeeping. So let's play with those. What you're getting at here?
Okay. Yeah, I love Kim Stanley Robinson. He's a hard sci-fi author. I love sci-fi, and it's very sciencey and very difficult. So many times I have to look up words that he's using because he uses a lot of $20 words, and I love that. Anyways, in one of his series, the Mars trilogy, where they colonize Mars and they terraform it, and there's a rise of political factions and complexity on the planet, and the interaction between Mars and Earth is complicated, of course. But in this new society that's being born, um, as they're trying to hash out what they're going to be, they're deciding what they're going to be. He mentions, and I'm paraphrasing here. He says people focus on the 1% or the half percent that they are different, and they really go after that half percent, and they ignore with all of the every fiber of their being the 99.5% that they have in common. So when I think about the differences between, say, a faith-based lifestyle, or whether it be Christian or Muslim or Jewish or whatever, or secular or atheist, what have you, I think everybody wants the same thing for the most part. 99.95%. Everybody wants the same thing. Yes, there will be differences, but we're more similar than we are different. So if you were to raise a child and I'm going to raise a child, we want the same thing for that child as parents, as fathers.
Yeah, I appreciate Mr. Robinson's sentiment. There's certainly some truth to that for sure. My pushback is that 0.5% or whatever the whatever the minority fraction is.
Yeah.
It it I think maybe I'm somewhere in the middle. It does matter, but you have to put in perspective, is the world going to end if, that 1% whatever is quote unquote fixed? Um try and think of an example. Because the best way to bridge that gap, is to to have a life that's like attractive, right? That other people see and like, oh man, because Lord knows, as you're well aware, you definitely see a lot of bad parents at the climbing gym. And, you know, it certainly goes a long way in the same way it did for me. Just that small thing that you probably thought, I'm sure you don't even remember this moment where you told your son to speak more clearly. But that kind of like style helping people to bridge that 0.5% or something different. Because as a point like analogy, you could communicate the exact same idea with some talking head where it's like, gosh damn, parents, dads don't have a backbone. They don't know how to raise their boys these days, and they're, bunch of little girls,
Yeah.
Nancy, something like that.
I think what is it? The feminization of men in America or something like that's one of the
Yeah.
talking points nowadays.
Which, I mean, frankly, I don't necessarily disagree with a whole lot, but at the same time, there is a lot to be said for. I've been thinking recently, I'm sure Ben Shapiro, you obviously know who he is, right?
Yep.
Matt Wall. Yeah. This, and I'm listening. I watch some of their videos sometime. They're somewhat, it's edutainment is what it is. And it's like, your only job is to get people fed up like that.
Yeah.
That's, I mean, I can agree with a little this, a little that, but it's like all you're doing is getting people fed. That's so useless.
Yeah.
It's so, even if you're speaking something that is true, it's still useless.
Yeah, they are, and this is my opinion, they are not good people. They are, like you said, rabble rousers. They have a platform and they're pandering to that base, and it's not useful what they're doing. Should we talk about gatekeeping?
Go on the gatekeeping.
Uh, yeah, I mean, in the same vein, I think in terms of gatekeeping, you hear different perspectives. I grew up in a very diverse situation. I had and have friends from all different stripes of life, all different demographics. The idea that one group of people is doing it right and everybody else is wrong makes no sense to me. That's the gatekeeping that I'm talking about, where you can't live a good life unless it's X, Y, and Z based, or you're doing this or you're doing that. And you see that all the time. A lot of people love to gatekeep life, anything in life. That was my whole point. You don't have to be. It does not have to be faith based or Christian based or, if you're an anti-theist, it's the same thing. They are anti-religion. They gatekeep as well. It doesn't have to be that. It's just like I said. Most of what people want is the same thing. It's that last small percentage that creates the disagreement. And no, we don't have to fix it. It's impossible. You can't fix it. We're never going to be a 100% in agreement.
Yeah, so here's my critique though, is that everyone effectively, is doing what even if their brain isn't on all the time, whenever their brain is on, they're doing what they think is right, what they think is the best life, whatever. And it's a very natural internal reaction if you think that what you're doing is the right thing or the best thing about
For sure.
whatever
Yep.
discipline in life, that you're gonna think like that's the right way to do it.
This is the
Right?
way my dad did it. This is the way I'm going to do it.
Yeah. But okay, so basically what I'm saying is that like at the very most myopic level, like that is gatekeeping, right? Or that's like the seed. You could say that's the seed of gatekeeping, to have that like internal recognition. And I mean, I would then also go on to say that that is a good and healthy belief to have, that yeah, you should you should believe what you're doing is the right thing, and to whatever extent you can, whatever extent you're able to understand, that
Yep.
it's right. Okay, so that part
But to that, I
is
would say,
also true.
for you in particular, do you believe you're 100% right?
No, definitely
No,
not.
neither do I. Are you open to different ideas?
Uh, yeah. I mean, I like to think. I mean, you have to tell me, but I'm definitely open to at least
Yeah,
hearing
yeah,
people
yeah.
for sure.
I get that from you. Yes.
Yeah. So here, yeah. So that was first sort of my critique, but I think that what you're getting at, I'll say maybe the same thing in different words. There is a certain because gatekeeping. I think it's sort of another word for just pride. Yeah, 100% sure is another sort of way to put it. Okay, here's sort of a fun way to think about it too. I was thinking to myself recently, like, how sure am I that when I die, I don't know if I'll go to heaven, but at the very least, there will be some judgment. There's, effectively, like, yeah, Catholic faith, that was it. Like, that's
Yep.
this is what reality is. So I was trying to think, if I were to put a percent on that, how much do I expect that to be the case? I was thinking, being completely honest, I'd say somewhere between 15 and 35%.
Oh wow. Okay.
Yeah, it's so interesting that you're surprised by that. But oh, man, how to explain that? Like, I feel perfectly fine about that
Hmm.
because it's such a profound claim
Yeah.
that someone died and rose from the dead and et cetera, et cetera. But at the same time, 15 to 35%, that's that's fair, in my opinion, reasonable to commit your life to that,
Hmm.
because not necessarily say that you go to hell if you don't believe, but I certainly believe there's
Oh
consequences in
yeah.
this life and the next for sure. The point that I'm getting here with, like, the gatekeeping thing and all of this is that there is a lot to be said for a pattern of belief that is self-satisfying. I heard someone, and this I think is on point, um, to sort of what you're getting. I heard someone say recently, how is it phrased? They were critiquing some sort of social ill. That, again, I didn't necessarily disagree with it. Yeah, it is an issue. And but what they followed up with was, well, they don't think the way we do, something like that.
Yep.
And it's like, it's like, why do you have to add that part to it? Like, I mean, yeah, I think they're wrong, but
Yeah. Yeah.
maybe I'm wrong. I don't know, but my best guess is that they're wrong. Yeah, but I think that's the right again. And I do, yeah, that's definitely, I think there is, again, we're sort of saying it in different words, but yeah, there is a certain pride there that is not the good kind of pride with the
No.
with gatekeeping there.
I've heard that in different circles, and I'm of the opinion that that kind of thinking is largely a lack of understanding and empathy. They don't think the way that we do. Yeah, yeah. We've talked about this.
Okay, so one last sort of small pillar. Chris's observations on differences, if any, slash tendencies between black dads and white dads. And we'll control for socioeconomic status there.
Again, my experience is anecdotal, but I've observed the entire spectrum, and that's good, bad, everything in between. But however, in the friends that I've had, my white friends that I've had, I've noticed that their dad's a little less strict. Um, and as for why that is, we don't know. But I thinking about my experience in America is we can't afford to not. Again, we can't afford not to do the best that we can. We have to be better than we are. So my neighborhood, all of the dads were very, strict is a little too harsh a word, but they were on point. They were present and some. Not
Yeah.
overly strict.
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
there were a
That's a
couple
good
that
one.
were overly strict, but generally the baseline was higher. I should say that's what I should say. As compared to some of my white friends, just thinking about how they, even stuff like interacting with your parents. You can talk to your parents that way.
Mm.
Not,
Hmm.
no way. No way. I mean, I know that sounds stereotypical, but that's my experience. It seems like it's a privilege to be less strict because society is more forgiving for young white kids. He's just a boy. Boys will be boys. Second chances, that kind of thing. Whereas we don't really have that luxury. We don't have that privilege. Second chance if you're lucky. A first chance, hopefully.
Cool. Well, it's been a great show. I've enjoyed it. Certainly, it's sometimes you don't necessarily hear anything new, but it's always. But even actually, just that last bit was like, huh, yeah, interesting. Generally less strict. Yeah, I mean, I can see where it coming. It's believable.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
My
So
anecdotal experience.
with that, there's no music to cue. Maybe we'll cue some music here just to keep continuity. But thanks for doing this, Chris. I will see you at the climbing gym next week, and have a great camping trip. Maybe you'll make your son plan it.
Oh, he's already
Probably all
cooking.
planned by now, though.
He's already
Cool.
cooking. Thanks for having me.
Well, have a great night. Send me your audio, and I'll talk to you later.
Take care, man.